Let's be real, you probably think you know the story of King Solomon. But what if I told you the Bible itself tells two completely different versions of his reign? Seriously. In one, he's a powerful but, deeply flawed ruler, and in the other, he's pretty much the picture of a perfect king. So today, we're going to dive in and uncover this tale of two Solomons.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at these two conflicting portraits of Solomon. Then, we'll explore the incredible international powerhouse and the glorious kingdom described in the book of Chronicles. From there, we'll figure out the chronicler's true agenda. And finally, we'll see what this ancient vision actually means for us today.
All right, so let's jump right in. Who was King Solomon really? Well, it turns out the answer completely depends on which book of the Bible you're reading.
And here's the difference in a nutshell. You open the Book of Kings and you get a Solomon who is, a towering figure, but one who gets super conflicted and makes some big mistakes, especially near the end of his life. But then you flip over to the Book of Chronicles and it's like a different guy. He's a man of peace, of shalom, and he's presented in the most ideal way you can imagine.
So what gives? Why the two different accounts? What is the real story behind this legendary king? To really get to the bottom of this, we need to see the picture the chronicler is painting, and it all starts with Solomon as this absolute international powerhouse.
The chronicler really zooms in on Solomon's savvy economic game. He partners up with the Phoenicians in Lebanon for their legendary timber and, of course, their amazing seafaring skills. He makes alliances with Syria, and in return, Israel's fertile valleys supply them all with tons of grain. It was this perfect, mutually beneficial engine of prosperity.
Now, to move all these goods, Solomon was using ships like these. A Tarshish ship, now that doesn't necessarily mean it's from a place called Tarshish. The term basically refers to a massive cargo ship built for super long-distance voyages and capable of hauling a huge amount of freight. You can kind of think of it as the super container ship of its day.
And get this, a single round trip for one of these ships could take up to 3 years. I mean, wow, 3 years? That just shows you the incredible scale of Solomon's trade network. They were waiting for seasonal winds and sailing these enormous distances. It's mind-boggling.
But Solomon's influence wasn't just on the high seas. Oh no. He was also a major player in the horse trade, dealing with big powers like Egypt and regions in what we now call southern Turkey. He was building this formidable cavalry. The guy was a master of both commerce and military logistics.
Okay, so with all this international wealth pouring in, let's turn to the home front. Let's see how it was used to build a truly glorious kingdom, a center of worship, and just unimaginable royal splendor. To take on these massive building projects, like the Great Temple, Solomon needed a workforce, a huge one. So he used a system of conscripted labor known in the Bible as the mass. This was the state-organized workforce that cut the stones and the timbers for his grand vision.
Now hold on, because here is a crucial point. The Book of Kings is super clear that this labor force included Israelites. They had to give up part of their year to do this work. But the chronicler, he makes a very, very specific change. In his version, the labor was supplied exclusively by non-Israelite foreigners living in the land. Just tuck that detail away. It's going to be really important later.
The sheer grandeur of Solomon's court became the stuff of legend. The famous visit from the Queen of Sheba is the perfect example. She came to test his wisdom and see his kingdom for herself, and she was left totally speechless. She basically said that the reality of his glory was way greater than even the incredible rumors she'd heard. The hype was real.
And nothing symbolized his splendor more than his throne. The chronicler describes this magnificent ivory throne with 6 steps leading up to it, and the platform for the throne itself was probably the 7th level. Each step was flanked by these intricate carvings, most likely lions, a symbol of ultimate power and majesty. Just try to picture that.
So, we have this picture of a perfect king, right? International power, incredible splendor at home, and a labor system that didn't even burden his own people. But why? Why did the chronicler tell the story this way? And that brings us to the real purpose of his account.
Because what the chronicler was writing, well, it wasn't just a straightforward historical record. Not at all. He had a much deeper, more profound message he wanted to share.
And here it is. This is the key. According to the scholar Dr. August Konkel, the chronicler put together this perfect image of Solomon's reign to show us what the kingdom of God is meant to look like in the ideal. He wasn't just recording the past, he was painting a theological vision of a perfect, God-blessed kingdom.
And, well, to create that ideal model, he had to be a little selective.
That's why the conscripted labor is only foreigners in his version. And it's why he completely leaves out the messy conflicts that plagued the end of Solomon's life, like his big fallout with his top general, Jeroboam. Those details just didn't fit the perfect picture he was trying to create.
So why does this idealized story, written thousands of years ago, still matter to us? Well, it's all about the vision that it provides for the future. The chronicler's message really boils down to three things. First, a community that trusts in God will be cared for and blessed. Second, the ultimate sign of this blessing is peace, or shalom. And third, by showing this perfect version of the past, he was giving his people, and by extension us, a blueprint, a hopeful vision of what the future could actually look like.
So the chronicler made a deliberate choice. He told Solomon's story in a very particular way to inspire hope. And it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How did the stories we choose to tell about our own past and our present shape our vision for the future? What kind of future are we building with the stories we're telling today?